Good morning, everyone, and we are on our second part, and I hope you learned so much in our second part. Although some I know that some are not, or generally Filipinos are not interested to or using last will and testament. Now, today's lesson involves about, or it talks about the general and specific legal requirements for each type of the last will and testament. Now we go with our first general requirement. It must be in writing. So that's the proof that that's the will actually of the testator. And it must be in the language or dialect known to the testator. So if someone is not familiar with the English language, so of course it could be Filipino, or it could be Cebuano or Chavacano. So that's really possible, or that's even a requirement, especially if the person does not understand English at all. So two or more persons cannot make a will jointly. It means in one document, and in they have reciprocal benefit, or they're taking advantage of the will that they are executing together, and or even to a third person. Now the will must be proved and allowed in accordance with the rules of court. However, I will be allotting another lesson, specific lessons on probate of a will, and also the application of the conflict of law rules. And actually we will have two separate lessons on those aspects of last will and testament. Now, today, as said a while ago, it's purely about the legal requirements. Now, for notarial will, there should be at least three credible witnesses. And in the later part of this section of the lesson, I will tell you what are the requirements for a witness to be considered credible or allowable or acceptable under the law. Now, it should be acknowledged before a notary public, and as previously discussed in our lesson on notarial commission, or on rules on notarial practice, a notary public is supposed to retain a copy of the document. However, this is an exception to that rule, and since as between the new civil code and the rules of court, or the special rules on notarial practice, the civil code will prevail. And the civil code says that a notary public is not obliged to retain a copy of the notarial will that he notarized, and the testator and witnesses must sign each page on the left margin. And there's an exception to this on the last page, because the names and signature of the witnesses and the testators appear therein. So there's no need to sign it on the left margin. However, I attended, or during our MCLE seminar, one of the justices of the Court of Appeals said that it's better to have the signature transferred on the right side or right margin of the paper, because when the court personnel, for purposes of recording, will have to stitch part of the left margin of the page, the signatures will not be seen, and there would be difficulty in verifying the signature or even analyzing the documents. So I think that's a very practical advice on the in the legal practice, coming from a justice of the Court of Appeals, and I hope you will take note of that. And for those notaries public listening, you might get a seed of wisdom from that. Now, the notarial will, all pages of the notarial will must be numbered correlatively in letters, and it must be placed in the upper part of each page. And if the testator, we go with the qualification or characteristic of the testator. If the testator is deaf or mute, or deaf mute, he must read the will personally if he is able. If he's not able, two persons to read it and communicate it to him, the contents in a practicable manner. So there is what we call as the sign language. That's really possible. So it can be done according to our law. Now, if the testator is blind, the will must be read to him twice first by the witness, the subscribing witness, and again by the notary public before whom the will is acknowledged. So this must be complied with, or else the extrinsic validity of the will could be attacked. Now, in the attestation or the language used, since we're talking about language of which the testator must be familiar with, and for the attestation, each witness must attest that they have witnessed the testator doing or subscribing before the notary public the will, and it was done voluntarily. And what would the law requires is only substantial compliance, and when it comes to language and attestation, and as to the form. Now, so long as there is no bad faith, no fraud, undue or improper pressure and influence. So if these elements are not present, it's okay that what if the language is as what they say, taglish, or it's mixed, or it was written therein that the language was translated to the testator. That's really possible. Okay. Now, as I said, three credible witnesses are required in a notarial will. But the question now is, who can be a witness? So any person of sound mind. So at the time of the execution, and the age must be 18 years or more, and that person should not be blind, deaf, or dumb. So without these senses, the person could not perceive and not perceiving what was the activity or transaction is all about. And that person must be able to read and write because a signature is needed. And in fact, if there's a limitation on the part of the testator, it was said a while ago that one of the subscribing witnesses will be the one to read the last will for the testator. And if we were talking about who can be witnesses, it's also possible, or we have to consider that who cannot be witnesses. Any person who is not domiciled in the Philippines, because the act of notarizing and the act of looking at or witnessing the testator to have executed the last will and testament must be before the presence and the eyes of the subscribing witness, and that witness must not be convicted with or of falsification, perjury, or false testimony, because these three crimes have direct relation with the honesty of the witness. So we have to preserve the honesty of the in executing the document, so that it could be relied upon by third persons and the court. Now, what about a holographic will? A holographic will is entirely handwritten, dated, and signed by the testator. In the first part of the lesson, I shared to you my personal experience, and that last will that I wrote was completely handwritten. It was dated when I was like having my birthday, and it was signed by me. Now, you have to take note that a holographic will could be made in or outside of the Philippines, and this, you have to remember also that dispositions written below the testator's signature must be dated and signed by him to be valid. This means that the dispositions or the statements after his signature, if it's not signed, then it should not be considered by the court, because it's like the signature that seals the last will and testament, especially that it is a holographic will. Now, when there are multiple dispositions signed but not dated, and the last disposition has a signature and a date, then such date validates, sorry for that sound if you hear that, such the date validates the disposition preceding it. So, if there are multiple dispositions, what seals it for the reliance of the court and third persons is the signature and the date of the written by the testator. And you have to take note also that insertion, cancellation, erasure, or alteration in a holographic will must be authenticated with the full signature of the testator. Now, for it to be credible and be relied upon, I advise that aside from the full signature, there should be a date when the authentication was done. Okay? I hope you learned from this. And in the next lesson, I will be talking about management prerogatives, especially for those who have company, owns business, or those who are under or occupying supervisory work in a business. Then I think it would be of help to you, and even for those who are occupying like um, non-management related positions. So I hope you will be looking forward to that next lesson, and I'm glad that you are listening to this lesson. Hope to see you in the next lesson. You take care and bye for now.